hello everybody. Thanks for joining us. This obviously is quite a significant time, especially today, seeing the COP26 statement landing. We've come together here to have a conversation, inspired by the fact that there are 9 non-violent protesters from Insulate Britain who could face a jail sentence within weeks. And we've invited a group of people here who have taken direct action and faced some time in jail as a consequence to come and talk about this. So we wanted to open this to say that there are times when we have to reach into some quite serious conversations. It's obviously pretty extraordinary to most of us that these conversations could possibly be needed given the scale of the risk that we're in and the complete political failure and the failure of adequate action. We hope that the work that is happening among people in this room and further afield is going to be speaking very loudly to policy makers and to help people really realise the severity of our situation. So we're going to reach straight into the discussion to talk about what's needed in these kind of fragile and complex times. Please, if you're a member of the audience and you want to put any questions into the chat, do, and I'm going to have those filtered through to me so that we can bring some of them to the panel at the end. So do the panelists just want to turn all your cameras on, please? So my name's Claire. I'm one of the co-founders of XR, and I work with the media team in the UK. On the panel today, we've got Roman, who has been organising with XR since 2018. And this year he's travelled the country running people's assemblies in multiple communities, particularly neglected communities, to understand more about what they're worried about and what we all have in common as a nation. He's part of the Insulate Britain campaign, and he's one of the Highway 9 who is currently facing jail time. The first time that I remember spending time with Roman was just before we went to occupy Greenpeace at the beginning of Extinction Rebellion, which is how I met the wonderful Frank Hewitson. So Frank's kindly joined us. He's been an action coordinator with Greenpeace for the last 30 years. He's based in London. He's worked on pretty much every Greenpeace campaign across the globe from that time. He's 56, has 2 children, a long criminal record, is banned from 3 countries, and says that he doesn't regret a moment of it, especially at this critical juncture. We've also got Angie Zelter, who is an activist who initiated and participated in numerous campaigns, particularly against nuclear weapons, militarization, deforestation, and human rights abuses. As a global citizen expressing solidarity, she has often been arrested and incarcerated for months in different countries, and is the author of 6 books. The latest one is Activism for Life. And we've also got Orla Murphy. Welcome, Orla. She is a 20-year-old Irish climate activist who dropped out of college and was sent to prison for her protest against the Irish government's inaction on the climate emergency. So first of all, I'm going to have a go round with all of you just to invite a little bit of your personal stories. So let's start with you, Roman. What was your journey to taking civil disobedience?
Thank you. It's really nice to be here with such esteemed company as well. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about this question earlier, and I was lucky enough to do a master's degree in corruption and governance, and I think that probably has helped to kind of have the backdrop to all the stuff that I've done, because academically I was taught that people in positions of power, small groups of them, often do things to benefit themselves to the detriment of their populations. And so yeah, I studied that for a year, and then a few years later my kind of journey into environmental activism was a little bit more sort of right place at the right time kind of thing, really. I was looking for kind of community building spaces really at the time, and I went to a talk at the Mayday rooms in East London, and I saw they were promoting this non-violent direct action training that was happening the following week by this group Extinction Rebellion, which I'd never really heard of. And yeah, I just went along to it really, and they kind of introduced me to all of these ideas around the kind of the lies being told to us by our political system, that everything is okay and we can just sort of continue living our lives as if nothing is really wrong. But there's this really huge looming existential threat that is threatening everything that we sort of take for granted right now. And I was just like in the right place to sort of take on all that information, looked into it for myself. And, you just have to scratch the internet for a brief moment to see really how dire things are with regards to climate collapse. And then, just kind of threw myself into Extinction Rebellion and various other campaigns for the last 3 years now.
Great, thanks, Roman. Okay, Angie, what's your journey into civil disobedience?
Well, I guess it really happened in the 80s when the Cold War was at its height and the danger of nuclear weapons and nuclear annihilation became so obvious, and it felt that I had to take part in the direct action at Greenham Common. And although my family was quite young at the time, I used to spend 2 or 3 days whenever I could up there getting arrested, and quite a lot of my early short prison sentences took place then. And then the thing that really inspired me was something on the fence which said, we have no leaders, the stars are in the sky. And that really brought home to me how important everybody is, and we shouldn't just look up to leaders and things. It was up to all of us. And another thing that it said was carry Greenham home, which of course has been happening since then. And then I started organising civil resistance campaigns here against nuclear weapons, Snowball and Trident Ploughshares, things like that. But also got involved with direct action in other countries, because the international solidarity and the impact of what Britain had been doing and is still doing, once as a colonial power and now still being a colonial power, but through its multinational, transnational corporations. It felt important to just carry on. So basically, I've just been doing direct action for the last 40 years, like so many other people.
Thank you, Angie. Okay, let's go to you, Frank. What's your story?
So my story, actually, I was a bit lost. I was sort of backpacking in Australia as one of the classic Pommy backpackers, age 24, trying to experience life in a different part of the planet. And I ended, very luckily, I actually got a weird job on a crisp packet commercial. Don't ask me how, but I met the guy who was doing a bit of the special effects, and he had recently got a yacht and he was taking backpackers down the coast of Australia. But turns out that he was an ex-Royal Naval helicopter pilot who'd gone AWOL because he couldn't stomach the fact that his helicopter could have carried an atomic weapon. And it was an epiphany meeting him and his wife. He really showed me what was at danger. And in Australia, it's very, very stark. The huge amount of forests that were being trashed at the time for Japanese pulp and paper mills. It completely opened my mind. And when I got back to the UK, I just couldn't quite understand. I mean, I thought if I could see what was happening in the environment, I just couldn't quite understand why other people weren't. And in London at the time, you're talking 1989, 1990, it was a complete lack of understanding, to be honest. What really fired me up, though, was the camaraderie. I've got to say, the internationalism of Greenpeace and the camaraderie of taking part, that bonding of taking part with other people in a cause that you fervently believe in, that has never left me, actually. And I think it's a really strong factor of NVDA, of successful NVDA.
Beautiful, thanks. And last but not least, Orla, tell us about your journey to taking civil disobedience.
Yeah, my journey's a bit shorter because my life's a bit shorter as well. So yeah, I think I've always been disobedient and not always by choice. So when I was, like, my mom hates me saying this, but she took me to my first protest, and because she doesn't agree with what I do now. But yeah, so we kind of had a strong sense of social justice instilled in us from a very young age. And then when I was 15, I got a virus and it never really went away. So I have this condition called chronic fatigue syndrome. And it meant that when I was 15, I had to drop out of school. And I learned that the education system doesn't really work if you're any way different. And I learned that the healthcare system doesn't really work if you're any way different. And then I went back to school and then I dropped out again. And it was like I've had a constant battle with that. And that was kind of my first experience, because I've lived like a relatively privileged life, that systems don't work, that some systems don't work for some people, and that there's flaws and it's not beyond questioning. And then when it came to the climate crisis and seeing like what was happening to people and seeing people rise up in 2018 and 2019 and with the IPCC report, it was a bit easier to understand because I had that experience myself. And then I started off, you know, going to the strikes and joining Extinction Rebellion Youth, and then Extinction Rebellion, the main one, when I was turned 18. And then we were doing different actions, but it didn't really seem that it was making any impact. And then it kind of became apparent that we needed to do more, and that meant getting arrested. And it was mainly, honestly, out of anger. I didn't really think too much about why what was the best thing to do. It's more like what feels right in this moment, and I've kind of just been following that ever since.
Great, thank you, Orla. Well, thanks everyone for everything that you've been doing. It's nice to hear the sort of different stories. So let's hear a little bit about how it feels to face prison and go into a prison as a result of your actions. I'm going to come to you, Angie, if that's all right, to open that one.
Well, the first time I went to prison, my kids were young. It was only for a week, and that was kind of okay. It was difficult for my family, especially for my mum. She said, how could you leave your kids when you're going to prison, you know? And but in fact, I was living with my parents-in-law, so that wasn't a problem. The longer prison sentences have felt interesting, actually. And I found out that actually, you know, it might be a bit depressing sometimes to be in prison, but it is interesting. And there's loads of people in prison that are just like people on the outside, and you can get to learn to meet them and find out about their stories. And also it's a time to learn what one of our institutions is actually about, you know, and it's important for us to know what goes on inside prisons. And I started getting my confidence and realizing I could be myself while I'm in prison, and I could campaign while I'm in prison. The campaigns might not be very you have a problem if you start doing campaigning in prison. They don't like you setting up petitions and organizing protests and things, but it teaches you a lot about what you can do. And I found that it was really important to make a record of what's going on in prisons, so that you know when you can get exercise. You've got various privileges when you're in prison, like an hour's exercise in the fresh air, which they very often don't give you, and therefore you can start complaining about that. And being fairly well educated and articulate and with support on the outside, you can do stuff which a lot of the other prisoners can't do. And so it's really important to feel your strength and know that you can kind of do all of that stuff. So the feelings of it were big. Oh great, I can actually have a rest now. Especially most activists, by the time they get into prison, they're absolutely exhausted because they've been doing all this campaigning, and you can actually sleep and have a bit of a rest, and you can feel good. You can start learning something and having books and reading all the stuff that you never had time to do. So it's a time for learning about yourself and getting stronger. So I'd recommend it to anybody.
Thank you, Angie. Yeah, it's something other people who I know have also often said. If you have your study program worked out and you know which books you want to look at, then you can do a lot of work whilst you're there. So Frank, let's come to you. And just a reminder, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. But Frank, how did it feel for you going inside?
Actually, there's quite a lot Angie said then that really resonated. The first time I was inside was for 2 weeks, and that was in Greenland and the capital of Nuuk. And in essence, it was remand, but we knew how long we were going to be inside, and then we were released back to Denmark. We spent one more night there, and then flown back to the UK. And at the time, I thought, wow, this is prison. And in hindsight, it was like a travel lodge, to be honest. What I went through later in Russia, it was, you got money to buy sweets. I mean, the government actually gave you pocket money every week. It was a strange situation there. Russia was entirely different, and there's many elements that will resonate and be familiar with those who may do time in the UK. I think it's important to state, though, the major difference for us is that, in essence, we were political prisoners. Putin wanted to make a very strong example of us, that he was not to be messed with. The Russian state was not to be messed with, and the oil industry in Russia was not to be messed with. So we were made examples of. We were all inside for 2 months. There was 30 of us. But on the 4th day, we were charged with piracy that had a minimum of 15 years. And in the UK and other Western countries, once you're charged, you know that the state has a significant case against you, and they will prosecute that case. And that was terrifying. I won't lie. It was one of the most painful nights I've spent in a cell, contemplating not seeing my kids for 15 years. And they're masters at mental torture, the Russians. They know how to hurt you. And it was particularly difficult. Eventually that charge was lessened to hooliganism, which carried a minimum sentence of 3 years, I think. So it didn't get that much better. But I think for me, knowing full on that what we had done was the right thing, it's so important to keep that close to your chest. And in the dark moments, you've got to look at why you did it. And you've got to remind yourself that when you took action, that you felt at that time it was the right thing to do. Because you will question yourself, and people will question you. As Angie said, why are you doing that when you've got a family? You're totally irresponsible. And there's one other thing I'd want to talk about a little bit, because it's a bit of a different situation being on a ship. In a Greenpeace ship, you have a permanent crew that do 3 months on, 3 months off. And then you have the campaign team that come on that ship to execute the campaign program or the direct action. And in actual fact, mentally, it's a very different thing to be doing 3 months on, 3 months off for a few years, and it's just a job, to then suddenly have your world turned over and end up inside. Whereas if you'd come on board that ship as an action team, you knew why you were on board. You've come to do something, and you mentally expect some kind of consequence. And I'm afraid there was a little bit of a split in the team. Some of them felt that they should definitely not have been inside, and that some of us were to blame. And that is particularly difficult in talking to those people afterwards. And I think it could be sort of a similar situation, could be joint enterprise. If you're holding a ladder and someone has gone up to the top of the ladder with a hammer and smashed the windows at DEFRA or the Home Office, the person holding the bottom of the ladder might think, hey man, I was just holding the ladder, I didn't do the damage. But in the eyes of the court, you are joint enterprise. And you've got to remember, if you take part in that, you might all get sucked up into the same activity. And so it's really important to make sure that you know why you're doing that activity before you actually end up in court. And eventually, of course, we were released, and it affected many people in many different ways. Some quite badly, and some simply breezed through it. I think Angie's point there, that it's actually a time to get back and relax. A bit difficult to do in a Russian prison with a broken window, -20 outside, I've got to say. But that fact that you can actually sit back and relax and think, hang on a minute, I can actually sleep, and boy, do you sleep, One other thing I'd say is if you are actually looking, we had no idea how long we were going to be inside. They were playing with us all the time. If you are given a set sentence, I think that is significantly different. You can actually plot your period of time and gear yourself to survive. And I think the last piece of advice I would give is make sure that you get on with your cellmates. Because if you're held in isolation, what they do is they stop you meeting any of your co-defendants. They do not want you talking to each other at all. And you're suddenly inside with 2 or 3, 4 people that you've never met before. And just make sure you get on with those people. And you might not like whatsoever the reason why they're inside, but you're in a cell 23 hours a day. And as Angie says, if you're lucky enough, you will get that hour. And that hour is absolutely vital. Never give up on your hour of exercise. It's absolutely vital. But just get on with the people you're in the cell with. It's just so important.
Cool, thanks, Frank. That sounds like some very sound advice, to say the least. So let's go to you, Orla. I'm really interested, as a very young person, how did it feel for you to go inside and do some time inside a prison?
Yeah, I was in a weird enough position because why I went to prison was that I refused to sign bail. So like I did my action and then I was arrested and taken to, you know, slept in the Garda station overnight and then taken to court. And even at that point, like usually after you do an action, like what's going to happen to you is not up to you anymore. But I was offered bail, which I thought I wouldn't be because I'd broken another bail to do the action. So I could have got out that day. So I was sitting in a cell, freezing, and very confused, and was basically asked by my solicitor, what bail conditions can I give them? And then they will let you out and you will not go to prison. And I prepared myself to go to prison beforehand. And I thought of like how I felt the last time when I accepted bail conditions that banned me from the centre of Dublin and that banned me from all government buildings, and how I knew that I'd been taken advantage of because I was a young woman on my own. And I just sat with that feeling because I was left in the cells for ages. And just before we went in, when we were in court, when we were about to, you know, be heard in front of the judge, the solicitor just whispered to me, can I give them Dublin too? Like, can I give them the same bail conditions that you were on the last time? And I told them no, because I didn't think it was right. And I had this feeling and I was like, no. And then they kind of ignored me. She like told the judge that, but then the judge gave me different bail conditions and they took me back down to the cells, and everyone assumed that I would sign them because they knew that I'd be going to prison if I didn't sign them. So of course, why would anyone go to prison if you had any other option in their minds? So they took me up and I could see the door and I could see my way out, and I was like, I can get out of here now if I just sign this. And I chose not to, and it shocked the police officer, and it was kind of funny actually and satisfying to watch. He was just so angry with me, and he called over my solicitor to be like, come on, talk some sense into this young Egypt. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that because it's wrong. So he took me to prison, and he said that same police officer that had arrested me, and he'd been the same one the whole time, and he said, you know, you go in, spend a day or two in there, sign your bail, make your point and get out of here. And that was it. And so I went in, and because I'd made that choice like so late after the action as well, I was like really set in it, and I was really like you were saying before, like thought it was the right thing to do, and it was really clear to me. Like I'd had a lot of time to think about it at various different stages, and I was lucky enough to have that. And when I was on the way in the van to prison, after, you know, having this gut feeling, being like, this is what you need to do, I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm going to prison. Like, I have chosen to do this. What have I done? And I was like I was getting quite upset, and I was about to start crying. And I just remembered like all the other stuff that I've been through in my life, like not even to do with the climate crisis or activism. And I was like, you know what, if you could handle that, you can handle this. And I just like had this moment, and I was like, you'll be okay, like this will be okay, you can handle it. And I think that's like, especially as young people, especially as young women, we're told that we can't handle so much, and you should be afraid of this, you should be afraid of walking at home at night, you should be afraid of going to a nightclub, you should be afraid of all these different things. And like, yes, the world is scary and it's hard and it's unfair, but like, we can handle so much more than we think that we can. And to have that feeling, and then to know that like, when you protest in Ireland, the worst thing that they can do to you is send you to prison. And they did that to me, and I handled it. And I was like sitting in my cell being like, this is the worst thing they can do to you, and it's not that bad. And I'm very lucky, obviously, to be in Ireland where it's not that bad. So yeah, I was like, because of COVID, I was 10 days in isolation. So I was 24 hours in a cell, and I did not get out of that cell. And then they wouldn't give me books as well, which is really hard. The TV didn't work most of the time. I couldn't tell what time it is most of the time. But I learned like what time I got different meals at, what time different things happened at, so I could kind of tell time via that. And then I was left out into the prison itself after the 10 days. And that was, I was in a privileged house. I'm not sure why I got straight into the privileged house, but I did. And there, your cell door isn't locked, so I was allowed to roam around the place. You had to be in bed after 12 o'clock, but basically you were allowed to roam around the house with 12 or 14 other women for the whole time. And that presented different challenges, because like, when you're in a cell on your own, you're left with yourself, and that can be bad and that can be really good, because you can have those moments of strength, and you can have time to reflect, and you can write, as I did, and when I had paper, and you can read, and it can be quite therapeutic almost, and you can, you know, meditate or stretch or do exercise even in your cell or whatever, and it's all up to you because there's no one else there. But then when I went out to the rest of the prison, and you're constantly have like 12 other women around you, who come from a variety of different backgrounds, who see the world very differently, that was good in some ways, because you could socialize and, you know, have other people, but also you had 12 eyes on you at the same time, and you had like 12 different opinions at all the time and stuff like that. So it was weird, like how easy you can get sucked into the thought process of other people, how the energy flows. Like, you wake up one day and there's just like a really anxious energy, and you don't know where it's coming from, but it's there and it's palpable. Or there's, you know, just a fierce depression over the house, or sometimes it's a happy, very rare, but sometimes something good happens and you're all happy. And the intensity of emotions, like, you're never really, because everything's so concentrated, because it's just the 12 of you in there together, it's always the extremes that you feel and stuff like that. So, you know, you're ecstatic or you're depressed. So I think, yeah, being advice, I guess, I give on all of that. And obviously prison in different places is very different, and even different times going to prison, you'll be in different wings and you can't control any of that. For me, what I found really that helped me to get through all of that was having a firm sense of self, being, and rules for yourself, because you are separated from society, you're separated from the rules that govern normal, you know, how you interact with others. We all have a set of rules, and we're kind of kept in check by other people, whereas those frames of references are gone once you're in prison. You're in a completely new environment, so you're only left with yourself and what you believe and what you think is right. And it can be freeing, because you can choose for yourself. You don't have that pressure from other people that you might have. But it can also be, you can then bow to the other pressure that you have, which is from other prisoners, and who have very different ideas of what life should be like and what we should do. And it's not bad. It's not to say that everyone inside in prison is bad, because that really isn't the case and wasn't my experience, but it just is a very different way of thinking. So make sure that you set out clear rules for yourself. How do you want to interact in this situation? And it can be a time of great like self-discovery, and you can decide like, oh, this is how I'd like to do and stuff. And so yeah, you can be great, really rewarding, and it is very tough, but you just have to, yeah, have a strong sense of self and a strong sense of why you're there. And I think those are the two most important things.
Thanks, Orla. amazing story about what you did on the lead up to that experience. And I think what you've just said about being sort of told to be fearful of the world, and as a woman being told to be fearful of what can happen to you and how you ought to really behave like a good girl. That's sort of how women get raised in our society. I guess there's something interesting that another activist sent to me a while ago about a Buddhist lecture about fear of fear. And I thought it's so interesting to examine what happens when you're feeling fearful, because sometimes you're afraid of something in the future which you know might be fearful, but you're afraid of being afraid, if that makes sense. And to be able to break that down and take those two pieces apart, I found very useful, like strengthening, to be able to sort of separate them and go, oh, okay, if I examine my fear, I can sort of see, I can try and see what it is, I can try and understand what it is. So Roman, you're facing this charge which has kind of inspired us to have this conversation. Do you want to speak a little bit about how that's feeling from your side, and perhaps with like other people that you've been working with? Yeah, a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the first thing was like during the kind of Insulate Britain campaign, it was so intense, and we were just like so kind of in that moment that there wasn't really, I didn't really pick up on kind of what was going on outside of that moment, really, of just, you know, sitting in the rows and just kind of getting ready for the next time of doing it. But in the build up, obviously was aware of the sort of I mean, Insulate Britain's been a hugely divisive campaign. Like, it's been, everybody had talking about it, but it's been hugely divisive, and that goes within the kind of activist field as well. And so with Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, there was a lot of kind of political differences there, or kind of struggle about whether to promote it from the XR side. And I think, to be honest, since being issued these court proceedings for doing the Insulate Britain campaign and being charged with breaking the injunction that the government has put on the roads, that's really just been like a really great bridge between these different campaigns. And yeah, as soon as I kind of got a letter or an email from the lawyers being like, basically, it's like you're going to be going to prison for breaching this injunction, I then just started to reach out to all the XR connections that I've got, because that's obviously where I've been working for the last 3 years and doing like putting in loads of time with that organization to help build it, basically. And loads of people have responded super positively, to be honest with you. I know there was differences in the build up, and as IB was going on, XR wasn't kind of commenting on what was happening because it's been so divisive. I know people in XR also have their opinions about it, aren't supportive of it, but I think a lot of people really are as well. And this moment, I think, just sort of transcends any of these individual campaigns or whichever flag you're flying. It's just obvious that the government is overstepping its mark right now. And if potentially in the week after COP, their first significant move is to imprison 9 peaceful activists, asking them to insulate homes and reduce emissions somehow, if this is the first thing they do after COP26 and 2 weeks of talking about climate and throwing out all these kind of sound bites, it would just be really indicative of where we are in our times. And I think a lot of people understand that, basically, and are really keen to try and support us. And yeah, it's not really anymore about like, am I XR? Do I kind of agree with this? Am I IB? Blah, blah. Let me whinge about XR. It's just above all of that kind of chat, to be honest with you. And I think the really interesting thing actually for me has been, since sort of not doing the actions with IB, the conversations that I've had privately with people from other groups that have never actually kind of openly supported XR, for example, but now in this moment are like, this is a really intense moment. We want to be able to help you however we can. And that's been really, I think, indicative of like really what's going on here, and that people are recognizing that this is, the stakes are being raised everywhere, like by the kind of environmental campaigns and actions that are happening, as well as the government in the way they're trying to respond to this increasing wave of protest, you know, the police crime and sentencing bill, all these things. And I think the more that they push, they're just creating groundwork for us to be able to come together more and more, basically. So that's sort of how it feels at the moment, to be honest. Like, people are just in support of us and wanting to do what they can to try and raise the profile of this moment.
Cool, thanks, Roman. And so you've all touched on this already a little bit, but I want to hear a little bit more about what has helped you to get through it. So you've given us a few tips here and there. but let's have one more little go round. So, you know, what massively helped you to get through those times? I'll go to you first, Angie, if that's all right.
Yeah, well, support from the outside is really, really important. Family, sometimes family won't support you. Friends, some of your friends won't support you, but there will be support out there. Trying to get that support network going before you go into prison is really important. Make sure that you have people there. You know, British prisons are much easier to deal with than prisons in other countries. You know, we didn't have that kind of support network when we were arrested in Sarawak, for instance. But we found support. Lawyers just came out of Sarawak and said, we'll support you, we'll help you, and we'll help you get bail, or this, that, and the other. So support is always out there. Also, remember, there's even support from your prison officers. Some prison officers went into the prison service because they wanted to help. There'll be some horrible prison officers, but some will be okay. So be open to when, who's okay and who's not okay. But that support from the outside, the cards that people will send you, the letters. Well, when we were in for the Hawk action, we were kind of put on sort of as extreme prisoners. And so we didn't get a load of the letters and books that were given to us for the first month or so, because they thought that we were high profile prisoners. And, you know, I don't know. So sometimes you won't get everything that you want, but you'll know that there's supporters out there, and eventually you'll be able to get in contact with them and they'll be able to get in contact with you. So that's really, really important. The other thing to be aware of is, or to do, is to take any opportunity you can to get out of your cells. So, you know, I'm not particular, I don't go to church when I'm outside, but I went to every church service there was, you know, or if there was an art class, or if there was a this, that, and the other, you know. And okay, as a prisoner, when you're on bail, it's different from when you're actually in prison, you know, imprisoned for a sentence. You'll probably have to do work, but that's an opportunity to just get out of your cell and do stuff, you know, and you might have choices about what you can do. And then the other thing is, as I said before, keep a really good record of what's going on, you know, the governor's applications and the protests that you might be wanting to do in prison. Keep a record of that, and don't trust that that might not get trashed. Try and get that out in letters that you write out as well, so that, you know, people know what's going on with you, and you'll be allowed to have your telephone calls and visits and things like that. Have somebody on the outside organizing the visits for you, so you get the visits that you want from the people that you want, and take in with you a list of names and addresses of the people that you want to be visited by. So all that kind of stuff is quite useful. Yeah, I think I touched on this before, learning something. When I was in Sarawak, I decided to learn a bit of Malay, Bahasa, because it was an opportunity to try and talk to some of the other prisoners. And I've got a crap memory, I'm awful at languages, but I did learn a little bit there. And it was something to engage myself with when I was there. That's probably, yeah. The cards, you sometimes get really, how can I put it, emotionally detached, and also seeing concrete around you the whole time. You know, you haven't got nature around, and most of us are nature lovers. That's why we're into trying to protecting the world. Somebody sent me in a diary, a calendar with lovely pictures of forests and lakes and things like that, which was kind of torn up, so the metal bit wasn't put in, but pictures were still there. And so I could put them on the prison walls with a bit of toothpaste. That holds it onto the wall, and that's great. And sometimes the prison officers would come in and they'd ruin everything and take it all away. And I just thought, okay, well, I'm sure I'll get some more cards in and can start again. You know, they said it was a drugs hall or something. They knew jolly well I wasn't taking drugs, but they do this sometimes to kind of keep you down. Just don't be pushed down too much. Just think of it, try and think of another way around. Okay, I'm going to get some more cards from supporters, and just make sure your supporters do send you in lovely cards, not ones with political messages necessarily, but beautiful cards of nature. I found I could do my exercises to them, and that was really good. I don't know if that helps.
Thanks, Angie. Yeah, sound advice. Don't send any prisoners any of your essays on climate change or related political issues. Sounds like a very sound piece of advice. There was a wonderful project actually with the Belarus Theatre Company who worked with some artists, including Ai Weiwei, to build a selection of postcards that they would send to political prisoners. They had a list of them. It was called I'm with the band. And if you sent enough of these postcards together, they would sort of put together to make a whole image. And I thought that was beautiful. I've been trying to ask our art department to help make those. So I hope they're in production, some beautiful art that we can send to people. All right, Frank, you've talked a little bit about what helps, but what helped get you through and what advice can you give us?
I just want to say how so supportive of what Angie has mentioned there. So much of what she says resonates, and it's so spot on. It really is. For me, letters from the outside were the simply most important thing ever. Receiving a letter from your wife, from a friend, from your family, from your kids. I mean, I was in floods of tears. Every time I got a letter from my kids, it absolutely killed me. But you're just living. You're living for that letter to come through. You know, we were slightly more isolated in Russia than you would be in a British prison. I think Angie sort of highlighted that. Books, my God, the books. We just so needed books, and eventually they started coming in. But it's absolutely essential to start reading stuff. Learning a language, my God. That's such a good idea, Angie. I'm afraid I did try and learn language. However, all I ended up doing was becoming a master of swearing in Russian. I learned absolutely filthy swear words in Russian, but that was about the size of it. And I've written down here humor. You might think that's impossible, but if there's something to laugh at, laugh, man. You know, if there's something that makes you happy and somehow takes the edge off and lightens the situation, grasp it. The first day, I was begging for a book, and I was knocking on the cell door every day. Please, book, please, book. And eventually the warden came down, and they opened up this hatch and they pushed this book through. Obviously, they were finding it hard to find a book. This prison we were in was an actual mental hospital, and then it was converted into a prison. And the book they gave me was Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. It's absolutely the most depressing, awful book. But the worst bit, I opened it, and the last person to take it out was in 1954. I thought, I am fucked. I am in here for my life. But you know, somehow I found that to be funny, and I kept it. I stole the book, and I've got it as one of my prized possessions. But the other thing that Angie said is people will be fighting for you on the outside. And Roman, I really hope you don't go inside, but if you do, don't for 1 minute think there's not going to be a team of people out there who feel so strongly about why you've done it, and feel so strongly about you and your fellow inmates that they will be there for you, and they will be, you know, campaigning and fighting and highlighting the issue. Don't give up on that. Remember that there's people there to support you. But I think the one thing I'd say, this is quite hard, be polite to the screws. Be polite. There's nothing wrong with it. You might get sort of shouted at or laughed at by others, but nothing wrong with being polite. And believe you me, it might well help you down the line.
Cool. Thanks very much, Frank. All right, go for it, Orla. What more on what helped get you through and what you advise for people?
Yeah, I think the others kind of touched on most of it. The letters were definitely a lifeline, and getting letters from all over the world was like, because before I went in, I didn't have huge support within Ireland even, and then to get all these letters from, like, I don't know, Australia and just random countries around the world was like amazing. That definitely gives you like strength. I got lovely postcards. Someone in Cornwall organised this campaign to send me postcards of like different scenes in Cornwall, and it was just really nice. Other prisoners as well. it was very, like, prison wasn't what I thought it was going to be at all. And you think it's like a full of bad people, and that's kind of what you're taught. But it's not. Like, the solidarity and support that I got from other people inside in there was amazing. And yeah, there's times where you can have fun, and it really feels revolutionary to have fun in prison and to be laughing and having the crack. And then something to do definitely that I think is great before you go, if you think you're gonna go, is to make videos. So that's what I did. Kathy from the Going on Remand stuff recommended that, and it just helps you to know why you're going there before you go, and also while you're in there gives you a voice. So there, I really think that was great. Yeah, I think most of the stuff was covered on yeah, having a strong sense of self and knowing why you're there, and yeah, that's most.
Amazing, thanks, Orla. All right, well, let's stay with you, Orla, for the next question, which is what do you think's needed next, or what are you hoping that the movement is gonna do in the face of this situation with at the end of COP? I think it's a real moment, isn't it? Despite the fact that many of us have known fine well that COP's not going to deliver any revolutionary brilliance for us on the climate front, it's nevertheless, the end of it does give us a bit of a watershed moment, I think, and people are already, you know, making these more public declarations about targets for temperatures being out of reach, and recognizing what we're committed to, which, you know, I think XR has been trying to speak about for a long time. A lot of other people have been trying to speak about, but if it's becoming likely, I think that the mainstream message at the end of this COP is that the Paris Agreement didn't work, and we need to accept that and move on with whatever needs to happen next. So I'm curious to know what all of you are feeling is needed in this time in terms of mobilization, movements, action. So have you got some thoughts on that for us, Orla?
Yeah, I mean, a simple answer is I have no idea what we need to do. I have some ideas, I have some thoughts, but I don't know, like, what the objective thing, what's the objective strategical thing, what's the objective right thing to do, and we never really know. We're just guessing. So yeah, I think from a youth's point of view, like, it's been kind of depressing to see Fridays for Future people go to COP and have expectations of COP and not understand how deep this crisis is. And like, having the intersectionality definitely was there, and I was up at COP for a while, and seeing the protests on the streets were great, but like, protesting on the streets of a city that's expecting you is not revolutionary. And so yeah, seeing some of the numbers that were coming out was good, but I mean, we need to do more campaigns like Insulate Britain. We need to, like, you know, grind the system to a halt. And then yeah, I mean, there's so many things that need to be done. I think we need to inspire people to resist. I think we do that through action. We need to educate people and show how bad this crisis is, and showcase some of the solutions, especially citizens' assemblies and more participatory democracy. And all how we can do that is by getting more attention, and how you get more attention is by doing more action. So I guess simply put, what we need to do is more action, and we need to do it. We need to resist, and sometimes people conflate resistance with reform, and I don't like when they do that. Like, resistance is going against the current, this current that is this system that's killing people every minute, every hour, every day. And reform is going with that current and trying to alter its path. So we need to reject false solutions. We need to resist in a very powerful way. We need to recognize when we get it wrong, and we need to get up and keep fighting, because we're in a mess, and we need to get ourselves out of it. So yeah, more resistance in many different ways, and more powerful each time.
Amazing. Thanks, Orla. Okay, Frank, what do you feel's being asked of us at this moment?
I find myself in sort of a fortunate position because I've already signed up to a campaign that we're going to be running against Sicard Energy, which is 30% owned by BP. It's the Cambo oil field off west of Shetland. And, you know, I'm lucky, in actual fact, that I've got a clear sort of project to sink my teeth into with quite a few other people. I tell you what worries me about it, though, is that there's going to be a lack of enthusiasm after COP. There's going to be a lot of people who've had enough of it, to be honest with you. And it's always difficult getting a story south into the London-dominated press. You know, if you're 10 miles north of Luton, it's an absolute nightmare. And doing it off the coast of Shetland, it's really, really difficult to get traction. And, you know, sometimes I think you've got to realize that it's not about the column inches. It's not about getting 1,500 views on whatever. It's about going out there and feeling that what you're doing is right. And, you know, crikey, it's 25 years ago, I was off west of Shetland campaigning against BP Foynhaven. And, you know, one could say that we've failed, that we didn't get very far with our direct action, that campaign was pretty much unsuccessful. But, you know, you've got to keep plugging away. And the fact that COP26 looks like it's been a fudge, I suppose, you know, enthuses me to get out there and just keep doing it and just keep battling away and keep punching away. That's all I need know what to do, to be honest. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
Cool, thanks, Frank. Well, it leads quite well onto you, Angie. What's your sense? What next? What should we be doing? What should the movement set its sights on?
We definitely have to keep on going, but I think we also need to be working with other organisations. Frank and Greenpeace going up to the Cambo is not enough.
Yeah.
I'd like to get an invitation from Greenpeace to join you. XRPs can join you, or Trent Ploughshares can join you. I'd like Greenpeace to be helping getting FOE, RSPB, all the different groups that were up there in Glasgow together to say, okay, can we together work out which places in Britain really need to stop, which corporations need to be stopped, which projects need to be stopped. Like Drax, it needs to be stopped, okay? But maybe we concentrate on Cambo to begin with. All of our groups should be going up there. And those people that can't get up there can go to the headquarters in London or to their local Shell garages or whatever. But to get thousands of people up there, and yes, there will be a lot of people after COP who will be really just distraught, in tears, upset, disempowered, depressed. But if there's an idea and an invitation given to them to take part in something, and we make it a little easier for them to do it, they will step up, because now is the time to step up. So I would really push for coalitions that are really, really important, against the climate destroying industries, against the climate destroying parts of our society, if we possibly can. And that's one part of it. But the other part is sustainable and resilient communities. We need to be building these in wherever we live, so that we can be seen to be active locally, supporting communities to start making themselves resilient. For instance, 2 years ago, we had floods in our area in Knighton, and the community came together. During the COVID time, the community came together to help provide food and support there. Now, you get involved in those things, as well as the against stuff is really important. You've then got in your life a balance between protesting against something and working for something. They kind of go together, and the people that you meet locally are then involved in also in what you're doing, you know, maybe in another part of the UK or against something else. So it's going to be hard, but it's also, I'm glad it's going to be over quite soon so that we can start really working together. And I'm just hoping that this is an opportunity for all these different organizations to concentrate on what brings us together, not what we don't like about another organization or we don't agree with about another organization. That doesn't matter. You know, we've only got a short space of time to do this. People are ready. I don't think we have to do very much more education of people, actually. I think most people understand much more than the leaders do what the issues are. You know, when I talk to people, they're there. I don't want to be talking anymore about the problems. There are a lot of solutions. And Aura, I think you're absolutely right. We've got to point out the false solutions all the time, because that's what we're being told, you know, let's go for hydrogen, but oh yes, let's not go for the proper hydrogen that isn't going to take up loads of energy. We'll keep the, you know, the big companies involved, etc. So the false solutions, all the biochip stuff. Anyway, let's go against those false solutions. So I suppose what I really want to see in the next few days and weeks is these organizations all coming together and deciding, at least in the UK, these are our main targets and we're all going to work together. And I say that with a little bit of experience from the forest campaign in the 90s, when Earth First on one level worked all the way across with FOE and WWF and Greenpeace and all these other organizations to come and try and stop the logging in old growth forests. And although there were all these differences between the ways in which we wanted a campaign, we joined together with a lot of issues and did a lot of things together. And we were very, very strong. And I think it helped get the Forest Stewardship Council process going, which although it has faults, at least it started a proper conversation in the timber industry about where their timber was coming from. And I think we need to repeat this now. We need to get, you know, lots of organizations all working together. And maybe some of the bigger, more resourced organizations can help us do that. And I'd certainly support that if it could happen. So yeah, let's keep going. There's nothing else we can do, really. We've got to keep hopeful. We've got to keep resisting. And direct action is part of the process, definitely. It's not the whole process. We need the lobbyists, we need the research, we need the petitions, we need the marches, etc. But the direct action helps the whole process continue in the right direction.
Thanks very much, Angie. Yeah, I found myself in a meeting some time ago. It was actually quite stressful. I'd just been to see Michael Gove, which you can imagine how enjoyable that was. And then I went to this meeting with lots and lots of kind of NGOs, third sector charity people, all sitting around trying to think about how they could work together. And I felt like I sort of sounded like a mad person when I said, well, maybe you don't need to agree on your net zero number. You could just all agree that we're really quite fucked and work together with like an agreement that we're up shit creek, and you all know. But it seemed like a bit of a batshit idea to go in there and say somehow, apparently. Anyway, Frank, let's go back to you then, because we've got, you know, we all know that we've got this bill coming through, and obviously that's that part of the political weather and what's taking us to this moment with Insulate Britain being finding themselves in such high risk, really, for something, you know, which ordinarily you would never face a prison sentence in this country for sitting in a road. So I guess, do you have any thoughts about collaboration with that in mind, about how to work together in a changing kind of like legal environment in the face of the bill and a failed COP? Because it's quite the combination, isn't it, to be seeing these conditions sort of shift.
It is, and I'm afraid to say I'm going to have to let you down. I'm not quite sure of the way forward. I definitely agree with Angie's coalition building. And I think it's quite interesting she mentions FSC then, because it hasn't been that successful, but it was a result of working together. Look, the day that you came into the Greenpeace office and freaked everybody out, I loved that day. And I just, since then, I have been so happy with XR and Insulate Britain, and I feel that it's done so much more than Greenpeace has been able to do. It democratized NVDA. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, it really did. It spread it out to the average person out there. And it made people realize that you could just step forward and be part of something. There was no huge inhibition. There was no sort of magic. It was just dedication and conviction. And I think that's got to be it. It's got to be a coalition. It's got to be building on society's, you know, increased revulsion with the failure to deal with climate change. There just has to be a group effort. I don't really know other than that, I'm afraid.
Thanks. And I wonder, Frank, if there's something interesting to ask about ourselves, about how we get people together more regularly to map out who's doing those actions that you guys do, which are very targeted, require high skill, high resource, specialist equipment. Not everyone can get out on a ship and, you know, do all of that climbing or, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and see what we think is the dynamic that's going on between that work, which is very pointed at industry, and the civil disobedience, which is much like lower barrier to entry in urban spaces, which I think they could complement each other better than they do at the moment in some ways. Maybe that's like an inspiring kind of place for us all to start to have a think about what's next. So Roman, I know that you're here kind of representing yourself, but also like a broader group who've got this stuff coming up in a really short space of time. So in terms of this question about what's needed, or what do you think should happen next, I guess for you, it's also a question of what do you need now, and are there things that your friends and your colleagues and your allies, whatever, are talking about? What are they hoping for? What do you want to see next?
Yeah, just want to say, like, it's really just amazing listening to all of you, and I think it's like a combination of all these things. Paula, especially, like, you're 20 years old. It's incredible the way that you talk with such clarity about these things. And I feel like, first of all, I totally agree with you. It's about resistance and recognizing that this moment we are in resistance, and we need to increasingly understand that. And it isn't a kind of, we sort of dip in for a moment and then kind of step back and then go away for a few years and then maybe sort of look at it from afar and see other people kind of taking these risks and be like, well, maybe I'll come back to that. We need to be in resistance now. And you know, Frank's saying there, like, dedication and conviction is the things that we need to hold basically in this moment and see it through this difficult period when, us 9 are facing prison time, but there's many other criminal damage cases and various other things that are coming up. And in this next year, we could look at seeing a lot of people being put away in prison by this government that is wanting to take the easy option of imprisoning a few individuals rather than the very difficult but absolutely essential road of dealing with this emergency head on and losing everything that we, as I say, just sort of understand our reality right now to be. And the other thing, you know, like Angie and Frank talking about it, like coalitions, like, just that's it basically. People need to be coming together and like setting objectives. They can go about them differently, but as long as we understand what we're trying to get to, our end point, these different groups can be working on them together. And so just like want to echo everything that everybody's saying here, basically, because the plan is here. Like, we know what we need to do. What is required now is for people to step up into the space that is being created. When something like Insulate Britain creates so much energy and so much friction that a spark is made, people need to not fight that energy that is pulling them in. And you understand what's happening. Everybody who's on this webinar, you're seeing what's happening, right? Like us 9, as well as I say, all these other cases that are coming up. James Brown is already in there, right? We have a Paralympian father, partially sighted man who's in prison for doing an action on his own to try and draw attention to the nature of this emergency. And it's sort of been a little bit passed by, right? So there's another moment here, we've got some energy and there's a spark, and if people feel themselves getting pulled in, I know it's terrifying, the reality that you might be getting pulled into, whether it's losing your stuff, like material things, assets, this, that, and the other, or just your freedom and having to spend some time inside of a penitentiary, right? But we've heard from our other panelists here, it is not the end of the world. And I feel okay about it right now. We'll see, it's not a guarantee, but it's pretty likely me and 8 other people are going to get put away for a time next week. But I feel very headstrong. I'm very, very committed to what I did, and I stand by all of our actions. And it's the right moment to be doing these things. And it has created some energy. And so you need to let yourself be pulled into the spaces that are being created. As the 9 of us step away and we go into a prison, there's room there behind us now for other things to be done. And you need to step into that space. Whoever's watching this webinar, like, take this message on and pass it on to others, because you need to step up before, like, in this moment. And that's already been said here in the panel, right? And we need other people to basically engage with this resistance. And the more of us that do, the stronger that we are, and the more insatiable it will become. And then the possibilities are endless at that moment, right? But it's too incoherent right now. We're not working together. Not enough people are stepping up into that space that is terrifying, right? Like, I'm scared, as everybody else has been here before, but you do it anyway because it is right. And as long as that is guiding us, then we're okay, basically, right? And so that's it. We need to step up. And on the 20th of November, so on the 16th and 17th, the 9 of us are going to be in court, likely be sentenced on the 17th, be put away for a period of time. We're not looking for anybody's sympathy or anything in that moment, but we're looking for you to step up. So on the 20th of November, on the first Saturday, we want everybody to come out for a simple march that's going to start at the Royal Courts of Justice at 12 o'clock, and then go from the Royal Courts on a simple march, and then sit down in a busy junction, basically, and show in this moment, when the government is trying to scare everybody, right, and to try and silence this dissent and speaking about what is really going on, we won't be cowed by it. And yeah, James Brown has also, like, supported this moment, and the 9 of us are asking people to come out in support of us, in support of what is going on, in support of the 250 Earth defenders who died last year, defending what is real in this world. And yeah, so come out on the 20th of November, go for a march, and then sit in the road and show that we are not scared of what is being thrown at us, because we understand what's going on. We're not stupid. That's it. Yeah.
Mic drop from Roman. Thanks very much for that. And yeah, I'm sure we'll all be mobilizing our butts off to make sure that everybody shows up on that day, Roman. I promise that work is going to happen. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions from the chat. So I'm going to bring a couple of these in. Hold on. This is a kind of practical question. Maybe panelists, you can, like, wave at me if you think you've got something to say on this. Probably a couple of you have got good advice. So for people who potentially face longer than remand sentences, could you advise about additional services, what's available in prison? Are there mental health teams? Are there drug and alcohol teams? Is there education provision? How do you get access? Chaplains? What kinds of work opportunities? So I guess a little bit more detail on some of the things that you've already touched on. And I'm guessing that it's most useful for people to hear this from the perspective of being in a British prison, because it's quite practical. So I don't know if you've got any extra advice on those things, Angie or Frank maybe, or Ola.
There's definitely drug and alcohol help in prisons, because so many people are in prison for drug-related or alcohol-related crimes. So whether you like it or not, you'll probably be put on a course anyway. But you can definitely get help. A lot of people in there have meds. In other words, they're being taken slowly off drugs in certain ways. So you will get that help. You can always see a doctor or a dentist or something like that. And if you've got any health problems, you can get help when you're in prison. It's probably a good idea to let your doctor know before you go in that you will be possibly be going into prison, and that you don't mind the prison having access to your health records, especially if you've got any medical problems. So that's probably a good idea. That's probably all I can say. I mean, yeah, if you're religious, I think I mentioned that before, there are opportunities to have somebody of your faith coming in to see you. If you're a Quaker, for instance, they'll get a friend to come in and do a silent meditation with you, or any religion of any kind. You can apply for that to help. A lot of prisons have prisoners who will have taken some training and are listeners and will go and talk to other prisoners in prison. that's quite useful. You could either apply to do that or have somebody come and talk to you. So there's a lot of opportunities of doing various things, and it is just well worth asking other prisoners what's going on, to find out from them what's going on, and also other prison officers as well, to find out. Your support group might also be able to find out, for instance, because of the drugs problem, you can't get books just sent in to you anymore. You have to go, I think, if it's still the case, through a specific dealer of books who the prison trusts. So you can still get your books and papers in, but they have to come through a certain place. But again, your prison support people can find out about that by ringing up the prison and asking. So yeah, there's quite a lot of support actually in prison, depending on whether there's total lockdown because there aren't enough prison officers, because the prison officers' conditions are so bad, you know. So that's another opportunity, by the way, that you will have. There are prison visitors, some of whom just do it for status and couldn't really care less about the state of the prisoners, but some of whom are good. And if you see a prison visitor coming into prison, go up to them and say, I'd like to talk to you about what the issues are. You know, for instance, some Irish prisoners in the Scottish prison when I was there for 5 months were given a really bad deal, actually. And all sorts of things were going wrong with them. People were coming over, their families coming over to them for visits and then being told they weren't there when they were there, things like that. There's quite a lot of prejudice going on there, and that's something that you can try and raise. I think that's all I got.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's quite comprehensive. Thanks, Angie. So I'm going to bring something from the chat now, which perhaps I might ask you, Frank or Angie, what you think about this one. It feels like it's for you, but there's somebody who's saying, I'm sad that nobody has acknowledged lots of communities don't have the privilege of choosing to go to prison, but instead are disproportionately imprisoned and negatively impacted by our legal system. And obviously that's something that I think we've tried to embed in XR from the start, was recognition of the global sense of privilege, that we feel it's relatively much safer, obviously, for people to take action like this in our country. We have a lot of potential for freedom in this way. And again, it can be such a tender kind of subject because what I think increasingly people are describing, obviously, is the criminal injustice system, the way that it actually functions. I'm understanding that a lot of people through their work in XR have had their eyes open to the way the legal system works. People who've gone inside have understood more about how it really, really works. So do you have any comments on that, basically?
I can comment a little bit on it, but I'm not in a really good position, I guess. But I would say that the international work that we do and the many different countries I've worked in, that the risks that are taken by quite a lot of activists in such places as Indonesia and Malaysia far exceed the risks that we are all taking and have taken. And the absolute sort of ramifications to them and their families is something, in actual fact, that really does hurt. In Japan, we had 2 guys who got done and they exposed the illegal trade in whale meat and the absolute riven corruption within that business in Japan. One chap was completely disowned by his family permanently. That's it. They left him. They completely left him. He was on his own, and my heart goes out to him and my support goes out to him, because he followed through with something that was taboo in Japan. And I think I'm not really addressing that situation. All I'm saying is that there are so many different ways of getting punished around the world. And all we're really talking about is something that's affected us ourselves. And that's why we're talking about what's happened to us. And I've had a glimpse of how it is around the world. And it's horrifying. And you just got to put your hands out to those people who've taken those risks.
Cool, thanks, Frank. Anybody wave if you want to add anything, otherwise, just to keep the time, I'm going to take one more question that we've got in the chat. So it's kind of on a similar topic, if you like. It's somebody's saying the courageous panelists here don't represent many British people, and I think that by that, you know, we all kind of know that us lot are a bit unusual. Perhaps if you were doing a sociological survey, you might say that we're not exactly the same as the average person in several ways. And asking, please, can people say something about how Insulate Britain is being seen as, you know, stopping many ordinary folk, and talking about people's difficult lives, and people are under so much stress, and obviously climate is adding to that stress, where we already have spiraling inequality and massive issues of social injustice everywhere we look. And so facing aggression from some of the public, and seeing the kind of the backlash and all of that stuff kind of emerge around that campaign. I mean, we know that this is kind of what we've all been touched on today, partly about how people can be disowned by their friends and family, people can lose their jobs, people can be have their qualifications taken away from them. I remember when Tim did his contempt of court at the Supreme Court, he was threatened to have his bar license taken up, you know, the ability to practice as a barrister was threatened to be taken away from him. So perhaps it's for you, Roman, really. The closing part of this question says, are the substantive and symbolic actions that Insulate Britain do, or perhaps sometimes that XR do you think that they're worth the backlash? And I guess this is, you know, putting it very much in the context of a civil disobedience in public spaces and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's really difficult. I mean, the way that's also been covered has been with a very specific lens of Insulate Britain. You know, those actions in the moment are experienced completely differently. Obviously, there is a lot of aggression, and there is a lot of people that are, you know, really angry about what we're doing. But again, in the context of where we are right now and what we're facing, doing campaigns like that, which are calling for the government to do things which would benefit the lowest earners in our society, for example, right, in the way of insulating all of our council housing stock by 2025. This is designed to try and be supporting the people that are worst off in our society and have been the most ignored. And of those people that are, you know, the lowest earners, they pay the biggest proportion of their income on energy bills. So specifically on that campaign, like that demand was set up to try and support the people that are the worst off in our society. I think more broadly on civil disobedience, something like this, like I say, it has been such a kind of a flashpoint, but that's because we're kind of really confronting the realities of where we are right now in this system that is unwilling to change. And in a moment when a few people are being sitting in the road, I mean, for a matter of minutes, to be honest with you, like after the first week or so, the police are responding to it so quickly. People that are sitting in the road for a matter of minutes and just sort of questioning this reality that we exist within, that everybody is caught up in this carbon economy that we live in. Yeah, I think it is right that we are doing something that is calling out this kind of upside down reality that we are living in, that we are not confronting what we are continuously doing every day in feeding the collapse of everything that we have around us. I don't know, maybe it sounds sort of disingenuous to sort of say it like that, I don't know, but it's really, it's hard to explain it any other way. That we are in this reality right now, right, that we are about to lose everything, and some people that feel that the only option they have left is to sit in a road, I think is, yeah, it is what is necessary, really. And yeah, specifically with that campaign, it was set up to benefit the people that are, as I say, the worst off in our society already. Yeah, I don't have a more kind of articulate way of saying it right now, because it's just quite difficult to respond to, do you know what I mean? Because obviously people are angry about it, but it seems that there's, as we're kind of talked about here, this need for coalitions, people in all different kinds of spaces to walk into the same, working towards the same goals, but you need that very public facing civil disobedience part of this kind of plethora of work that needs to happen to be able to navigate this very difficult moment that we find ourselves in. And I think it is an essential part of it, basically, for people to be able to put their bodies in the roads, basically, for a period of time to really physically demonstrate the severity of the time that we are in, as well as all the backroom work that's going on. You need this very public facing element that creates all of this energy, basically. Sometimes it's very aggressive energy, but it has to come to the fore for people to really be confronted with what we are facing.
Cool, thanks, Roman. Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of like I was in court a couple of weeks ago delivering a kind of necessity defense for myself. And, you know, a big part of what you can bring into a legal case like that is about proportionality. And I think one of my co-defendants said, well, I'm supposed to try and describe to you that our actions are proportional, and obviously putting some paint on a wall is not proportional in any sense of the matter with what we're trying to get people to pay attention to. And it feels quite important to me that we're recognizing that work as well as part of a sort of tradition of politics, and something that we supposedly have access to a legal defense for a lot of this work, which is what we say we believe, that this isn't you know, law breaking for the sake of it. This is certainly something which has an noble tradition behind it, basically, in the name of justice itself. So final thoughts then from each of you. Let's take something from Frank first.
My final thoughts are actually with Roman and with the other 8 people who are going to go up in front of the beak and take the sentence that he is likely to be he lays down. And my feelings are with you, and I've said it already many times. Have the strength of your convictions and be proud of yourselves. Be proud of yourselves on that day.
Thanks so much, Frank. Angie, go for it. Final closing thoughts.
Yeah, lots of support for all the people who are going to be in court. Remember that you've got support on the outside. And to everybody else, come on, now's our time. You've got to continue the good work. Get out there protesting in any way in which you can.
Thanks, Angie. All right, Orla, final closing thoughts.
Yeah, similar to the other guys, fair foxy, everyone at the 9 who's gonna be facing something really scary, and doing it with a lot of courage and a lot of heart, and that's what we all need to do. So yeah, I hope that we can all be as courageous and full of love as you guys.
Thanks, Orla. And go for it, Roman. Closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, just thank you to all the other panelists. It's been like really nice to just hear all of your thoughts on this stuff. And I think the main thing I want to say is just like with this stuff, to try and face it head on, you need others around you, and try and find those people who are also willing to kind of take these steps. And I think for Insulate Britain, I saw how radical the potential of small groups who are really committed to doing something together is. It was a really profound experience. Basically, it's difficult to kind of communicate it, but people going out, doing something that is extremely stressful, extremely adrenaline inducing, extremely exhausting, but going time and again together, it was really just the groups and the friendships and the bonds that we formed that allowed us to do that. Basically, if we were required to do it on our own, there's no way it would have continued for 6-7 weeks, but it did because of the bonds that people formed in those really intense moments. And that's what allowed it to happen. And I think that's really something that we need to learn from, and just start to come together and just start to build these communities of resistance. Angie was talking about that need to build community as well, come together with other people that are willing to do this stuff and connect with them and see these things through together.
Thanks, Roman. Okay, well, thanks so much, everyone, and massive respect and appreciation to you all. And I can see some of the names in the participant list as massive respect to you lot as well, because there's some super people out there. I know James Brown came up in this conversation, and I meant to bring him in at the beginning, but I'm going to close with like honoring his time that he's spending, his courage, his bravery. I certainly think if he can appear to do such impossibly extraordinary things, I think we all can find our courage and our conviction going forward, as long as we remember that we're in excellent company, and historically we're in even more excellent company if you recognize yourself as part of a long tradition. So yeah, more power to your elbows, people. Keep going, and lots and lots of love, and I hope I'll see lots and lots of you on the streets on the 20th, no matter what happens in the courtroom with Roman and our friends. All right, thank you everyone, lots of love, take care, go well, and see you soon.